Madison never planned for the truth to come out like this. Not in the middle of Fairmont Crest's most carefully curated charity soiree, not with crystal chandeliers gleaming overhead and Dani smiling like everything in her life was finally under control. But secrets in Beyond the Gates have a way of clawing their way into the light when the stakes are highest, and Chelsea's secret, buried under months of lies, half-truths, and carefully timed tears, was ready to explode, because Madison had reached the breaking point after weeks of watching Chelsea play the victim while quietly manipulating everyone around her, especially Dani, who had defended Chelsea at every turn, believing in her redemption arc, believing in her claims of honesty and growth, believing that the woman standing beside her had finally chosen love over ambition. But Madison knew better. Madison had always known better. And when Dani pulled her aside near the balcony, asking why Madison had been distant lately, why she seemed tense whenever Chelsea entered the room, Madison tried one last time to hold the line, her voice shaking as she said some things were better left buried. But Dani pushed, insisting that if there was something she needed to know, she deserved the truth, and that single sentence cracked the dam wide open, because Madison had carried this secret too long, had watched Chelsea rewrite history too many times, and had finally realized that protecting Chelsea meant betraying herself. So Madison looked Dani straight in the eye and said the words that would change everything. Chelsea didn't just leave town last year for personal reasons. She didn't just walk away to find herself. She ran. She ran because she was being investigated for falsifying medical records tied to Naomi's test results, because she altered documents to secure funding from a private donor connected to the Crest Foundation, and because when the pressure closed in, she let someone else take the fall, someone whose career was quietly destroyed while Chelsea reinvented herself as the wounded survivor. And Dani froze, the noise of the party fading into a dull roar as she demanded proof, her voice sharp with disbelief. But Madison had come prepared, pulling out emails, encrypted messages, and a voice memo Chelsea never meant to leave behind, one where she casually admitted she could fix the paperwork and clean it up later. And as Dani listened, her face fell piece by piece, anger mixing with humiliation, because this wasn't just a secret, it was a betrayal that implicated Dani by association. And when Chelsea noticed the shift, when she saw Dani's posture change and Madison's resolve harden, she knew something was wrong, rushing over with that familiar practice smile, asking what was going on. But Madison didn't flinch this time, didn't soften the blow, didn't step aside. She said it right there, loud enough for Chelsea to hear but quiet enough to sting. "I told her." And Chelsea's mask shattered instantly, panic flashing in her eyes before she pivoted to anger, accusing Madison of jealousy, of twisting facts, of trying to ruin her happiness. But Dani cut her off, demanding answers, demanding the truth, and Chelsea tried to spin, tried to cry, tried to say she was protecting everyone, that she did what she had to do, that the system was corrupt anyway. But Dani wasn't listening anymore, because the realization had sunk in that every argument Madison ever had with Chelsea, every uncomfortable silence, every warning she ignored, had been rooted in this one massive lie. And the heartbreak on Dani's face wasn't just about the secret. It was about the trust that had been shattered in front of an entire room full of people who would soon be whispering. And Madison felt no triumph, only a heavy sadness as Chelsea begged her to stop, to talk later, to fix this. But Madison shook her head, her voice steady for the first time in months, as she said she was done cleaning up Chelsea's messes, done sacrificing her own integrity to protect someone who never took responsibility. And when Chelsea reached for her hand, Madison pulled away, saying she couldn't love someone who built their life on lies. And just like that, in a moment that felt both inevitable and devastating, Madison broke up with Chelsea, telling her she needed to face the consequences alone. That this was where their story ended. And Dani, still reeling, told Chelsea to leave. Not just the party but her life, because whatever they had was built on deception. And as Chelsea walked out under the glittering lights of Fairmont Crest, her reputation in tatters and her future uncertain, Madison stood her ground, heartbroken but free, while Dani realized that the real betrayal wasn't Madison's revelation but the months she spent loving someone who never told her the truth. setting the stage for fallout that would ripple through every corner of Beyond the Gates, because secrets never die quietly in Fairmont Crest. They explode. And this one had just taken love, loyalty, and trust down with it. The fallout didn't end when Chelsea walked out of that room, because in Fairmont Crest the doors may close but the echoes linger, and as the party slowly resumed with forced laughter and clinking glasses, Madison felt the weight of every stare, every unspoken judgment, knowing that she had just lit a fuse that would burn far beyond one relationship, while Dani stood frozen for several long seconds before excusing herself, retreating to the study where the walls had heard too many confessions to count. And there Dani finally let the anger spill, pacing as the reality sank in that her name, her foundation, her reputation had all been orbiting a lie she never agreed to carry. And when Madison followed her, unsure whether she would be thanked or blamed, Dani didn't speak at first, didn't look up, just asked in a hollow voice how long Madison had known, and when Madison admitted it had been months, Dani's silence cut deeper than any scream, because betrayal by omission is still betrayal in this world. And Madison owned that, saying she stayed quiet because she loved Chelsea, and because she thought maybe, just maybe, Chelsea would come clean on her own. But Dani laughed bitterly at that, saying people like Chelsea never confess unless the walls collapse around them, and somewhere across town Chelsea was already spiraling, calling lawyers, deleting files, replaying Madison's words over and over, furious not just because she was exposed but because she lost control of the narrative, the one thing she prized above all else. And when she tried calling Madison, the call went straight to voicemail, each unanswered ring driving home that this time there would be no forgiveness, no dramatic reunion, no second chances wrapped in tears, while rumors began to spread like wildfire through Fairmont Crest, whispers about falsified records, about donors pulling out, about investigations reopening. And by morning Dani would receive calls from board members demanding explanations, forcing her to choose between protecting her legacy and shielding someone who had already burned her trust to the ground. And Madison, sitting alone in her apartment as dawn broke, would finally allow herself to cry, not because she doubted her decision but because loving Chelsea had cost her more than she ever admitted. Yet even through the pain there was clarity, a sense that for the first time, she wasn't living in someone else's shadow. And as Chelsea stood on the edge of town watching the sun rise, realizing that Fairmont Crest was no longer safe ground, no longer a place where charm and manipulation could save her, the truth became unavoidable. Madison didn't just end their relationship, she ended Chelsea's ability to hide, and with Dani now determined to uncover every layer of the deception and protect herself at all costs, Beyond the Gates was poised for its next explosive chapter, where alliances would fracture, investigations would deepen, and Chelsea would soon learn that running from the truth only makes the reckoning louder. When it finally catches up to you. And the reckoning came faster than anyone expected, because by the next afternoon Fairmont Crest was buzzing with attention so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath, as Dani convened an emergency meeting with the Crest Foundation board, her composure flawless on the surface, while inside, she was replaying every smile Chelsea ever gave her, every reassurance that now felt weaponized. And when the first board member asked point-blank whether the allegations were true, Dani did something no one anticipated. She didn't deflect, didn't deny, didn't protect Chelsea's name. She said the foundation would be cooperating fully with any inquiry and that she, personally, had been deceived. A statement that sent shockwaves through the room and marked a decisive break that Chelsea would feel like a knife in the back once she heard it, because in Beyond the Gates loyalty is currency. And Dani had just gone public with her loss of faith, while Madison, still nursing the emotional fallout, found herself becoming an unexpected focal point as people reached out, some offering support, others probing for details, and every message reminded her that telling the truth doesn't end the story, it just changes your role in it. Yet even as she tried to stay out of the spotlight, Chelsea refused to let go quietly, showing up unannounced at Madison's apartment, eyes wild, voice trembling between rage and desperation as she accused Madison of ruining her life, of choosing Dani over love, of pretending to be morally superior while enjoying the chaos she caused. But Madison didn't rise to the bait. calmly saying that Chelsea ruined her own life the moment she decided lies were easier than accountability, and that what hurt the most wasn't the scandal. It was realizing that Chelsea never trusted her enough to be honest, words that finally broke through Chelsea's armor, reducing her to tears as she admitted she was terrified of losing everything, terrified of being nothing without the image she built. Yet even that vulnerability came too late, because Madison had already closed that door, telling Chelsea this was the consequence of every shortcut she took, every person she used. And when Chelsea left, it wasn't with the dramatic flair she was known for, but in silence, the kind that signals an ending you can't undo. While elsewhere, Dani faced her own storm as investigators requested documents and donors demanded reassurance, forcing her to confront the uncomfortable truth that loving Chelsea had nearly cost her everything she worked for. And as Dani and Madison crossed paths days later in the quiet hallway of the foundation offices, their interaction was cautious but sincere, a shared understanding passing between them that neither of them had come out unscathed, yet both had chosen integrity over comfort, a choice that would define the next phase of their lives. And as Chelsea packed her belongings under the cover of night, preparing to leave Fairmont Crest once again, she finally understood that this time there would be no reinvention waiting on the other side, no clean slate without consequences, because in Beyond the Gates the truth has a long memory, and once it's spoken aloud, it follows you wherever you go, setting the stage for a future where Madison steps into her own power, Dani tightens her grip on her legacy, and Chelsea's past refuses to stay buried, promising even darker revelations still to come. And even as Chelsea disappeared into the shadows of Fairmont Crest, the ripples of her exposure continued to collide with everyone's carefully constructed lives, because Beyond the Gates has a way of making every secret metastasize, and soon text messages, emails, and whispered rumors began circulating at a speed that no one could contain, each one peeling back layers of Chelsea's manipulation to reveal the full extent of her schemes. And as Dani worked tirelessly to rebuild the foundation's reputation, balancing board meetings, donor calls, and public statements, she found herself leaning on Madison more than she ever expected, calling her at odd hours for advice, for emotional grounding, for a reminder that morality could still exist in a world built on deception. And Madison, though cautious, responded with measured care, providing clarity without enabling Chelsea's chaos, their bond strengthening in the crucible of scandal, a quiet but undeniable intimacy forming between them that Chelsea had never been able to replicate, while Chelsea herself, isolated and frantic in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, spiraled through a mix of shame, anger, and denial, vowing revenge, plotting ways to reclaim her power, to rewrite the narrative, yet finding that the walls were closing in faster than she could manipulate. And when she tried to reach old allies, she discovered that many had already aligned with Madison and Dani, unwilling to be tainted by her disgrace, leaving her scrambling, grasping at alliances that didn't exist. And as nights bled into days, she became haunted by every whispered accusation, every corroborated detail that Madison had revealed, every subtle but cutting judgment she imagined in Dani's eyes, until even her confident exterior began to crack, leaving a raw vulnerability that she had never shown anyone before, a vulnerability that in another life might have inspired empathy, but in Fairmont Crest it only reinforced the perception of a fallen woman. And meanwhile, Madison and Dani navigated the storm together, their relationship tempered by fire, grounded in truth and mutual respect. And yet neither could ignore the underlying tension that came from the knowledge that Chelsea was still out there, scheming, waiting for a moment to strike back, because Beyond the Gates never lets anyone truly rest. And even as life seemed to settle into a fragile new rhythm, the town itself felt the aftershocks, neighbors whispering, friends glancing over shoulders, and the foundation board quietly preparing for any legal fallout that might emerge. A constant reminder that the past refuses to remain silent, that secrets have lives of their own, and that Chelsea's absence was merely a pause, not an end, leaving every resident of Fairmont Crest on edge, wondering not if, but when the next revelation would arrive, and who it would destroy first. Chelsea's absence, however, did little to quiet the storm she had set in motion, because in Fairmont Crest, even silence speaks, and soon every corner of the town seemed to hum with speculation about her next move, from the gossiping baristas at the cafe, who had once smiled at her charm, to the high-powered lawyers nervously reviewing old contracts, all wondering what skeletons would tumble out next, while Madison and Dani, still navigating the wreckage, found themselves reluctantly thrust into the center of public scrutiny as media outlets sniffed out every detail of Chelsea's downfall and framed Madison as the moral compass who dared to reveal the truth. Yet even praise came with pressure, because in Beyond the Gates, heroes are often trapped by the consequences of their own courage, and every kind word sent Dani spiraling through conflicting emotions. Pride for Madison's bravery, guilt for having loved someone who so thoroughly betrayed her, fear that Chelsea might strike back in ways no one could anticipate, and the sleepless nights grew longer as they both realized that exposing the secret was just the beginning, that every friend and foe in Fairmont Crest would soon be choosing sides, alliances would fracture, whispers would harden into rumors, and the delicate web of power, influence, and trust that held the town together was now wobbling on its fragile threads, while Chelsea, isolated in her small apartment, obsessed over strategies to regain control, replaying every conversation, every lie, every slight she could exploit, yet finding that her former allies had mostly turned cold, unwilling to risk being associated with her scandal, and with each rejection, her desperation grew, a dangerous mix of cunning and panic fueling her actions, until even Madison's calculated patience and Dani's careful diplomacy could not fully contain the ripple effects, because Beyond the Gates thrives on chaos, and Chelsea, though momentarily sidelined, remained a living, breathing threat whose influence could re-emerge at any hour, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate in ways that would shock the town. And as Madison walked through Fairmont Crest, aware of every side glance, every whispered conversation behind her back, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, not just for herself, not just for Dani, but for the truth itself, which now acted like a living entity, demanding attention, demanding justice, and demanding that the guilty face the consequences, while Dani, juggling foundation work, personal betrayal, and the public fallout, found herself both inspired and terrified by Madison's resolve, and the two of them formed an unspoken pact of vigilance, knowing that Chelsea's eventual return was inevitable, that the town would not rest, and that only by standing together, rooted in honesty and courage, could they hope to survive the next wave of revelations, because in Beyond the Gates, even a single secret, once exposed, can become a storm that reshapes lives, rewrites histories, and forces everyone to confront truths they had long ignored. And as Chelsea stared out her apartment window at the glittering skyline, plotting her next move, she realized, with cold clarity, that Madison and Dani were no longer pawns, no longer manipulable, no longer blind to her schemes, and that the game she thought she controlled was slipping fast, leaving her teetering on the edge of ruin, while Fairmont Crest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how far the fallout would reach, and who would survive it when Chelsea inevitably returned.